You see, something's going to happen.
What? What's going to happen?
Something wonderful.
What?
I understand how you feel. You see, it's all very clear to me now.
Welcome to the Occult Rejects. In this episode, we got part 2 to the Carl Crusher, growing up in Mormonism. And today, co-hosting with me, we got Teresa, we got Thresh, and we got Mike. Thank you both, or all three of you, for jumping on tonight and making it happen with me. If you want to check out any of their stuff, I will leave their links in the bottom, and I'll have them plug themselves at the end of the show. And Carl, my man, thank you very much for coming back on again. It's always great chats. You're already blowing my mind before the show. It's this new stuff you got going on that it's like, damn, I want to talk about this now instead of the other topic. But I gotta finish, finish this. But we will get to it. So I'm telling you, definitely wait to the end of the show. We'll be going into something a little bit different besides what the show's completely about. But Carl, please, in case there's new listeners by the time this drops, let everybody know where they can find your work and what you're about a little bit.
Yeah, just look online, especially on YouTube, for Carl Crusher. That's the name that I go by, so it's easy to spell and remember. I post all of my content and work on there if I'm going to different research locations to investigate strange phenomena or mysteries at different places or whatever. I document all of it, working with the History Channel or Discovery Channel and different side projects like that. But yeah, I post all of that all over. You can find me as Carl Crusher everywhere.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And, I will say, and I've pretty much mentioned it every time I have him on, the Magic Mesa and a few other episodes that I've watched from him from around that time, I think he's some of the best, in my opinion, paranormal footage on YouTube. There's actually like legit shit that I think is simple but actually mind-blowing at the same time to show you that it's there's something going on that our eyes aren't picking up.
Yeah, for sure. There's definitely something to like ancient indigenous locations that I realized that people who were highly qualified and highly funded and contracted with the government or working for the government were very interested in the same thing, like going to these ancient sacred sites that they called access points on the longitudinal nodes of the array. That's how they talked about it. But they were spots that they considered like ancient indigenous locations where you could go and sit there and meditate, and it would amplify psychic abilities. And they were like super into that clear back into the 1970s and 80s. And when I kind of figured that out, I got really fascinated with it. And Magic Mesa is one of those places that is definitely, I nicknamed it that, Magic Mesa, because it's full of that kind of phenomena. Like, you can go and sit there at night, and when you're quiet, you'll swear that you hear voices of people that just are not there. Like, you'll hear a woman talking, or you'll hear someone ride right past you like a cowboy on horseback, and there's literally nobody there. And then just all kinds of strange stuff, even seeing like UFOs and strange plasma lights on the hillside that flow around, all kinds of cool stuff.
Yeah, you even had some cool stuff with Mount Wilson Ranch, too, that I found interesting.
Yeah, there's allegedly a UFO hiding underground, which is like a big thing. Like Ross Coulthard just came out on News Nation, and they've been doing all these specials, like multiple interviews with these Green Berets and Delta Force operators that are coming out as whistleblowers as part of the actual UFO crash recovery program for the government that have done it for over a decade. And they're coming out on the news and saying that these UFOs are coming out of the mountain. They're like phasing right out of the ground. They'll just come out of the ground and out of the mountain. And then they use what they call psionic assets, or like a remote viewer that's part of the Green Beret team with the unit. And they use telepathy to take control of the UFO and either land it or to crash it. And then the Green Beret Delta Force team goes in and they capture it and the entities and everything. And this has all just come out in like the last week and a half. It's kind of wild. So like, yeah, over there at Mount Wilson in Nevada is one of those spots that Bigelow Aerospace back in the day with Hal Puthoff and those original remote viewers and a bunch of scientists were up there looking for one of these things that was like hiding underground, like some chamber that has a UFO in it or some kind of a object in it. So yeah, we worked with the History Channel and part of Skinwalker Ranch to try and bring some people out of the government and a bunch of funding and equipment with drones and ground penetrating radar. And we tried to find this thing and where it was, and then try to communicate with it. And we did that for 2 seasons on the History Channel on a show called Beyond Skinwalker Ranch.
That's awesome. Good for you. Good for you. Can you plug your upcoming thing, or is that like something you can't talk about yet?
I don't think I signed an NDA, so I think I can plug it. I don't know when it's going to come out, but there's on Discovery Channel. My last trip when I went over to Norway as part of Project Hestalen, I went over there, and my first day there, I did an experiment where I did meditation with a small group of people. And then on the night vision camera, I filmed a UFO that appeared in the sky and came down and like landed on the ground on the other side of the lake and moved around all weird, kind of like the Rendlesham Forest incident. I filmed like over 20 minutes of this. So, excuse me, the Discovery Channel saw that footage and they actually wanted to use that footage. They did a whole interview with me, and then they went over to Norway and filmed like 2 whole episodes where they tried to replicate like the whole thing, like the meditation experiment and stuff. So that's a whole new thing that's going to be coming out. I don't know if it's on Expedition X is the name of the show or whatnot, but I'm supposed to be interviewed on camera with the host, and then they're going to show some of my footage, and then the team from Discovery Channel goes to Norway and does the same thing.
That's wild.
That's
man.
really very cool.
Damn. All right, nice. Good for you.
Carl, have you heard of a guy named George Van Tassel?
Sounds super familiar. If you jog my memory for a second.
Okay, so have you heard of Giant Rock in it's in Landers, California?
Yes.
And it's basically the start of a lot of the UFO movement stuff. And they basically had like a meet out at Giant Rock since like I'm going to be wrong on the date, but let's just say 51.
Yeah.
And they basically had a group meditation that they would have out at the Rock. And I just randomly stumbled upon it because one day I seen an article on an alien named Ashtar, and my name is Ashton. So I'm like, weird. I wonder where that is. So I look it up, and I literally grew up 20 minutes from that place.
Yeah.
I had no clue or anything, but that same place, he built this place called it's called the Integratron, and he was supposed to have got like telepathic messages on how to build it, and then he like passed away before it was ever complete.
Yeah, it was supposed to be like a big psychic resonator, like a dome all made of like wood that you go in and lay down inside and you meditate, and then it would project your consciousness like up into space. And that was the same thing they were trying to do with the big rock, like, and it goes back to the idea of Stonehenge and all of the monoliths and megaliths and even the pyramids, and this theory that they're part of a grid system that taps into the ether or of the electromagnetic field of the earth. So just like we were saying, how like even in the Montauk Project and everything, how they were looking at those ancestral nodes, there's like this invisible electromagnetic field that goes through all of reality. It goes through the whole earth and everything like a big grid. So everything that you see as reality is full of this invisible electric field energy that's all connected. And basically, like they realized that there were certain places where that electric field runs longitudinally, like horizontally this way, like across the surface of the earth, like in layers, like a pancake or an onion. But then there's also transverse energy that goes up vertically, that goes clear out into space and connects like through quantum entanglement to everything. That's like how everything works with gravity and all that. But at these spots where the transverse and longitudinal waves cross, there's these X points that they call a node. And if you find one of those nodes and go sit in that node, there's usually weird geological formations. And there's also strange ancient artifacts. And usually it's a sacred site, or there's some kind of a temple or petroglyphs or pyramid, or you're going to find something there that signifies that ancient people knew and could sense that there was a powerful place. And the idea is you go sit in that spot, and then you go out of body, or you meditate or pray or do your ritual. And it's like you leave your brain and just the housing of your body and jump into that array. So all of a sudden it's like jumping onto the internet of the universe or whatever. So that's how remote viewing works, and telepathy, how getting messages from aliens and remote viewing, all that stuff works along that grid, like this invisible Wi-Fi system. But somehow ancient people knew that. And when you go to these spots, allegedly there's a lot of like you're going to find Stonehenge or ancient petroglyphs, or like the big stone, like big round rock or whatever. And people feel compelled, just like a homing pigeon or whatever, to gather around and to like try and manifest their consciousness or to communicate with aliens and different stuff. There's like a strange energy there, but that's a very common thing all over the place. And there's definitely something to it. And the government is really active in trying to figure all of that out, find how it really works, find people that are good at it, and find ways to weaponize it, you know? And so that's kind of the dark side of it. But yeah, it's an interesting thing, and there's definitely something to it.
Thank you. All right, not to get off the topic of this stuff, but unfortunately, we'll get back to it. We'll get back to it.
For sure.
I think in the last episode, we kind of like, I think you talked about like the baptisms and like the marriages and stuff like that in the temples. I don't really know where else you wanted to go after that, or any other things you want to get into. I guess it's really kind of up to you.
You know, we pretty much talked about like my upbringing and how strange that is, and really how they don't tell you what goes on in the temple. But when you're a little kid growing up, you're like singing songs about the temple, about how you're excited to go to the temple, and how you want to get married there someday and all this stuff. So you're like really looking forward to it. And when you just go to church on Sunday, it's very boring. You know, when I went, it was just, you're singing hymns and you're sitting in meetings and you're being taught lessons about the leaders of the church and out of the Bible and the Book of Mormon, and it's pretty benign. And you're doing a lot of like work projects and weird service projects and stuff. But when you are older and you go to the temple, then suddenly you're plunged into like this deep level of like Mormon version of Masonic initiations and stuff. But even as a kid, there's a lot of like weird memories where, in conjunction with the Cub Scouts or the Boy Scouts of America program and the relationship that it had with the church, like as I was growing up, the prophet of the church, he would say right over the pulpit to everybody that like the Cub Scouts and Boy Scouts of America was a part of the gospel. Like trying to get your Eagle Scout was a part of being a faithful young man.
I think that was like I think that was like a paid advertisement.
Yeah. And the way that the church is really, in bed with secret parts of the government and with other agencies like that and the Cub Scouts. It's super weird, you know, what they were doing. But there is a lot of times where I was told, hey, there's a Cub Scout service project. And then I would dress up in my Cub Scout uniform or not, or whatever, and then go meet up at the church with my friends. And then we would load up in a truck or in a van and go out to like state lands or public land or some government facility and do like child labor all day.
Oh my God. Have you guys seen the movie or read the book Holes?
Yes.
Oh my God, this is like what you're describing.
It was
My kids just watched it like recently. That's so funny. And I got them the book and they're like, Mom, this is scary.
Yeah, pretty much. Have I told you guys the story on this show yet about how I was taken out to the facility that was doing genetic testing between goats and spiders?
Yeah. That was bugged out.
Yeah, that was super weird. That was probably the weirdest one, aside from going to do the.
I think Thrash missed that one, actually. I think that was the one he wasn't here for.
That one, Thrash.
Yeah. Look at his face. He's like, I don't think I heard that story.
Just for those that don't know it, I was just, one of those same projects where I showed up and was taken on a white van, and we drove for like 2.5 hours out into the desert. I was told it was to a town called Mud Lake, but I don't know if that's where it really was or not. But basically, we shoveled goat shit out of the stalls for the animals. And it was a genetic laboratory for the government where they were doing cross genetics between goats and spiders. And they were mixing the spider silk in with the goat proteins, and they could get it out of the wool or out of the milk. And they were making advanced Kevlar and body armor and different proteins and using it for all kinds of weird stuff. But that's what they told me. And then after that project, when I was telling my dad, he was like, oh yeah, that's a secret government facility out there. That's weird. But yeah, I was taken there as a kid for the church and the Cub Scouts to do like child labor there. I don't even know if they fed me lunch. It's like,
yeah, it literally was like Holes then.
It was totally
water.
Like
oh my God.
Just shoveling out there, It was always an adventure. We'd be up in the mountains somewhere at some place like fixing fence or running chainsaws. I'd be like 12 years old. Half the time I thought it was pretty cool, but looking back on it, I'm like, I'm pretty sure a lot of that was kind of illegal.
Something I do want to ask, it just popped into my head now. Maybe I had an idea and I forgot. Why is Mormonism so, I guess, pushing or associated with the Boy Scouts? Like, what's...
I was always taught that it had to do with like preparedness and it was like an essential part of development. There's this underlying layer during the generation that I was brought up in, and it kind of evolves. Like if I talked about this now, my brothers and people my age and stuff this would resonate with them. But now they don't talk the same way. But when I was growing up, there was really this idea that we were at the end times. Like the real name of the church is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And the idea is that we are in the latter days or the last days, and the clock is ticking. And basically that means that there's going to be wars all over the world, big cataclysms, all kinds of disasters, and like basically Book of Revelations kind of stuff, as all those prophecies are going to come true. And a lot of it's going to happen in America, and a lot of it's going to involve the church. So it's kind of like how Scientology has the Sea Org. They have like this fake Navy that L. Ron Hubbard, he's like a fan of he was part of the Navy. And so he adopted all that stuff out of the Navy. Well, the Mormon church, they sort of took on the ritualistic and the occult side of Freemasonry, but then also adopted kind of this militia and doomsday cult kind of mindset as they moved west as pioneers and as they settled in Salt Lake City. and then they started preparing for the end of the world. And so this idea of Cub Scouts was like, when I would go up to scout camp or would go to scout camp projects, we would pray at the beginning. It was all mixed in with the church at the same time. We did it as a church group and scouts, and we would do scouts at the church building all the time. It was all mixed together, but it had to do with this idea of like, you're kind of like being raised as a soldier, sort of like to prepare for the end of the world. So you had to be able to start a fire, shoot a gun.
It was like Doomsday. Doomsday Cult.
Yeah. This idea is that, when the cataclysm happens, we might have to go live in the wilderness or like camp out in the mountains.
Zombie apocalypse, whatever it is.
Yep. Pretty much.
That sounds like a friend of mine was actually raised in a cult called the Worldwide Church of God. And it sounds very similar. I think actually, I just looked it up really quick. The founder, Herbert Armstrong, borrowed many ideas from Mormonism. So that's interesting. It's very much like a doomsday prepper.
What
like
are your friends?
The world was ending. A friend of mine.
I've covered that guy on my show.
Oh, really?
Herbert Armstrong. What the
Oh shit! Sorry.
Oh, that is bugged out. No, that is bugged out. We only dropped it maybe 2 months ago. Yeah, this guy met with all these world leaders. There's something going on besides Jesus. I don't know.
That's wild.
This guy's then it was like a cult.
She grew up in that, and she was like, "It's not a way to live. That's for sure."
Oh, we gotta get her on the show.
No.
Yeah, I grew up with a version of that, and then there's even these these pocket groups that would form in communities and around certain figures too. I don't know if you guys are aware of Chad Daybell and Lori Vallow. Basically, they're a couple that were up in Rexburg, Idaho, which is where I lived. So I lived in was born in Rexburg, went to high school in Sugar City, and was all in the same kind of area right there. But basically, this guy, Chad Daybell, he was a Mormon guy and a bishop, and he became friends with a couple of people that had near-death experiences where they swear that they saw God and they saw Jesus, and then they saw visions of the end of the world. And they saw like all these details of when it was going to happen, how it was going to involve the church in Salt Lake City, and how people were going to have to go flee out in the wilderness and all this stuff. And there was this book that got published called Visions of Glory that came out, and this anonymous publisher that had this, or author that had this near-death experience was claiming, that he's a Mormon guy in Salt Lake City and he saw the end of the world and all this stuff. And that book, and around that book, there was a couple of more books. A lady named Julie Rowe also had this near-death experience, or claims that she did, and she wrote like 3 books that said kind of the same stuff, like the end times visions and things. But Chad Daybell, he was like this independent book publisher that latched onto this and started publishing these books. And so within Mormonism, and even in Idaho, especially up in Rexburg where I was still a member of the church back then. It was like a cult within the cult. So there was like people reading these books that weren't actually official church books, but they were kind of, because they were written by members, published by a bishop. And so there's people going to these meetings with Chad Daybell and Julie Rowe and these other people talking about their near-death experiences. And it was all like in secret. And I had family members that were all sucked into this. And I was like, what is going on? But it all had to do with people wanting to know when the end of the world was going to happen and who's going to be president. And is China going to invade into Oregon? And because all this stuff is in these books, right? But at the end of the day, this guy, Chad Daybell, who's publishing these books, ends up like the same story as always, having like affairs on his wife. There's mysterious deaths. And then in the end, him and his new wife, they're now in prison because they murdered their kids and burned them in a bonfire in the backyard. And then they flew to Hawaii and hiding because they thought that the end times were here and that Jesus was on his way back. And so it was time to fulfill the prophecies. And so they went out, they literally murdered their kids and burned them in the backyard. and then they went on a trip and got arrested, like poolside in Hawaii.
Wow.
But that was all like this a weird cult within the church and within the cult. It was like super bizarre.
Were they like sitting there sipping on drinks with umbrellas after they did that?
What's that?
Were they like sitting there at the beach sipping on drinks with umbrellas in it after they did some shit like that?
Literally, the body cam footage when the police officers show up to arrest them, they're in like Kauai in Hawaii, and they're sitting at a resort by the pool, and Lori Vallow is laying there in her bikini, and she has that book, Visions of Glory, sitting there next to her open, like she was reading that book. And they're there in Kauai because they're waiting for Jesus to come back, and had just got done murdering 3 kids.
Oh man, I think I might have even seen something about that on Netflix.
Yeah, I think there's a whole documentary on there. There's a ton of news reports and stuff on YouTube. Yeah, Chad Daybell and Lori Vallow and Julie Rowe, and then the book is called The Visions of Glory and the Time Is Now. But yeah, there was like a whole mini cult within the church that started that was all like literally excited, like the end times, just when there's like the 3rd blood moon and all this stuff, because it's like all this crap was in those books. You know?
This sounds so similar. There's a Catholic prophecy called the Illumination of Conscience, and that sounds like super similar actually, because apparently when the illumination happens, that's when we'll see like the state of our soul as God sees it. And then we'll have this like opportunity to like change if we need to change or whatever. And then apparently there'll be a time of like refuges. So everyone needs to like, whoever's a believer is going to like need to flee into the forest. And like, there's people who have already started to prepare refuges for like massive amounts of people. I don't know. It's interesting, but.
Yeah, it's like the same kind of pattern that goes clear back to like Moses in the Bible fleeing Egypt and crossing the Red Sea. There's like that mythology of having to go survive in the mountains.
Exactly, another Exodus,
Yeah, that's the same pattern. Like they just looking forward to that repeating. But then at the last time, when it's the real one and the final one, then everybody thinks that their church is going to be the winner.
I guess, right? Seems to be a common theme.
You don't want to jump the gun on that one.
Yeah, exactly. But
you got to do is check everybody's dates and go for one a few years after the fact, because then you can keep them a little bit longer.
So far, nothing's happening. Like my grandpa, he was prophesied and given blessings and told that he was going to be there and help build like the temple in New Jerusalem, which is supposed to be in Missouri, by the way, in America. But he had all these blessings saying that he was supposed to be there and help build that temple. But like he died a long time ago. So then they just changed the story and say, well, maybe he'll be there as an angel, you know, he'll help as a spirit or something. I'm like, okay. So they just rationalize it and move on. Everybody does. Yeah. But yeah, growing up as a member, it was just different like that. You know, you just, before the internet, there's no way to fact check. There's no way to look anything up. Like if you had any questions, there was like maybe a few pamphlets and things going around and maybe a couple of videos. But like when I was a missionary and went out when I was 19 years old and went to Arkansas for 2 years, that was my first time ever even hearing anybody talk bad about the church or about the leaders of the church. And I was like 19, you know, but up until then, everybody that I knew loved the church. They were all members, or my family, the whole community. It was like living on an island, you know, and had no idea. But then when I got to Arkansas, it was like immediate conflict. There was like actually people educated with the Bible and could counter claims and say, no, this didn't happen, and point out things that I didn't know, and, you know, tell me that Joseph Smith actually was a polygamist. And I was like, no, he wasn't. And then you go look it up and you're like, oh, you know, he was, you know, I'm a missionary and I didn't know that. Like, so weird stuff like that happens to you like along the way. But yeah, once the internet came out, it's like becomes a slow unraveling, because then you can check with archaeology, and you can check genetic histories, and you can look up other you could see the other side of the story and see the back of the tapestry, and then suddenly you're like, oh, there's this whole dark history that's way different than what I was taught, you know. But that took me a long time, like my whole life. You would think that when you're in the middle of doing the Masonic rituals for the first time, that it would like occur to you that this is BS, or like, what am I doing here? This is crazy. And honestly, it does occur to, I think, everybody. Like the first time that I went through and was doing my initiation and endowment and all that stuff, where you're changing into all the costumes and the robes and doing the hand signs and passwords and all that, like the whole time I was thinking, it was like a paradox inside me. I was like, on the one side, I was thinking, holy shit, this is freaking weird. Like, this is so bizarre. Like, what are we doing here? Like, why are we all dressed like this? Is this really what it is? Like, that was all going on. But on the other side, there was this whole life since I was a child growing up that was like baked into me and basically brainwashed to look forward to this moment. Like, this was real. And I was taught like, oh, this is just like the old biblical temple. So I'm like, my brain is just looking to make it make sense. So on the other side of it, I'm also like trying to tell myself, oh, it just feels like this because you had no idea. Like, oh, this is what the church is really about. Wow. And I just tried to stay like curious and everything. And I actually became really obsessed with going to the temple and like memorizing all of it and like trying to learn all of the mysteries about it and dig into where it all came from. And ultimately that's like a two-edged sword, because like that's the problem that the church has, and that I think any big organization or cult has, is that if you have a member like me who's really passionate about it and really loves it and really believes it and is actually having paranormal or spiritual experiences in your life, and so you're looking for answers like this is real, then what happens is you dig into it like a tick and you study it like really hard. And what happens is you end up finding out, like as a Mormon, like, why are we doing all these handshakes, and where did these where do they come from? Where does this originate from? And does it come from Solomon's temple? Does it come from the Knights Templar? Like, where does the roots come from? I want to study that too. So as you're digging to try and learn and to become more spiritually deepened through study and everything, you end up realizing, oh, well, a lot of it did come from Solomon, but it came from Solomon's books of demonology. Whoops. And you go, oh, it did come from this book and this book, but they came out of Freemasonry and they originated in these rituals that involved this other stuff that I had no idea about. Oh, and so all of a sudden you're torn with, like, while you're digging for spiritual truth to try and deepen your life and to get closer to God, you're realizing that what you're doing and what you're studying and where it came from, you've kind of been lied to about, and it didn't come from where you thought it did. And maybe you got tricked and you're doing things you shouldn't be or whatever, and you're better off on your own, like figuring it out. Or like all of a sudden you're like, wait a second, the origins of the church and a lot of these rituals have their roots in like Enochian magic from John Dee and Ed Kelly that were like basically 800 years before Joseph Smith, and they were doing the same stuff. But until the internet, until you run into that stuff and study it out, you would never know. Like, you would have no idea. It's just like mysteries, like you would read in the Bible or in the scriptures, you know, like miracles and weird mysteries about people. You know, Moses goes and talks to God in the burning bush and things. And so you don't really question it until you're older and you can really speculate about things and stuff. So it took me like over 35 to 38 years to really unravel all that stuff.
Wow. Yeah, I'm sure.
What was it like when you did start coming across that? I mean, did that hit you pretty hard at first?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me was when I was on a mission in Arkansas at 19. That was the first time that like a minister or a preacher from another church, they would see us as like hostile entity. Like we're basically a foreign invader into their territory, because their whole livelihood and everything is off of their congregation and coming to church and paying tithing. So now these Mormon missionaries are there knocking on all the doors, mowing people's lawns, doing community service, and like saying, come over here, come join our church, and trying to proselytize their community. So we're like trying to steal their customers, you know? So we would be out going door to door, talking about the Book of Mormon, about Mormonism and stuff. And these preachers would just pull up in their vans or trucks or whatever and get out and just start yelling at us, you know? And they would just start dropping these facts. Oh yeah, they would be like, I condemn you in the name of the Lord. And they would put their arm in the sky, and they would, oh man, they would get right in our face, and they would grab the Book of Mormon and pull it right out of our hands and throw it on the ground and step on it. And,
oh my God.
It was just direct attack. Like, TV, get out of my town. You're not welcome here. Oh my God. I'm going to go around. And so they would go around to their congregation and then even hold meetings and educate their congregation. Like, hey, when the Mormon missionaries show up with their name tags, this is what you tell them, you know, ask them about why the Book of Mormon says that people with black skin is a curse because they got black skin because of they didn't follow the gospel back in the old days or whatever, and ask them about this. So they would give the members of the community all of this information about church history, about polygamy, about all these problems with the Book of Mormon, and how and just things with the church that I had no idea existed growing up as a kid in the church. I had no preparation for whatsoever. So then all of a sudden I'm out there, and not only are these ministers and preachers throwing it in my face, but now everybody in the community's got pamphlets. They've watched these anti-Mormon movies at church about us and all this stuff, and about our doctrine and teachings. And a lot of it, I'm like hearing this, like, that's not true. And I'm just arguing back like, no, that's totally lie. That's not true. That's not true. Because like I said, there's really no internet back then. Like this was right before, when I came home from my mission, when I was like 21, that was when I got my first cell phone, and it didn't even have internet. You could just text it. It was one of those old Nokias, you know? But when we finally got like internet and could look things up later, then it's like those things that I heard on my mission back then that these preachers said and that I ran into in people's homes, like they would just say this stuff to me, like, why would they promote John C. Bennett to first counselor of the church within 1 year when he was an abortion doctor and he lived with Joseph Smith right when he was doing polygamy? Were they doing abortions? And I was just like, what? I didn't even know Joseph Smith was doing polygamy. What is polygamy? Like I was so naive, you know? Like, so then when I got home from my mission and married, you kind of go back in that bubble. I'm like back in Idaho and back in Utah. You just kind of push all that out of your mind. Like I'd been at war in Iraq or something, you know, I survived all this hostile fire, you know? But then when you're sitting there at home at night, you know, that same thing that I would do, I would be wondering about the temple, about the secret handshakes, or I'd be wondering about the Book of Mormon talks about all this ancient history, like these big cities where they would have these battles with 100,000 warriors, and they would be on horses and chariots with swords and armor. And I would be like, where did that happen? You know, there should be a chariot somewhere. There should be helmets or swords. There should be artifacts. So you start, as you get older, all these things that I had run into since I was younger and on my mission, eventually you're like home at night and you run into things on the internet, or a YouTube video comes up or something like that. And pretty soon you're going down the rabbit hole. Even though you might have good intentions, pretty soon you're on a website that explains, oh, that's where the secret temple handshakes come from. Oh, that's why the Book of Mormon was this way. That's why this and that. And all of a sudden you realize, like, wait a second, like, for me, I can remember exactly like where I was sitting in the moment. And when it actually occurred to me that the only way that any of this stuff makes sense with the Book of Mormon and the church history, the only way that any of it makes any sense at all is if it's all made up, if it's literally all a lie or fake. And as soon as that occurred to me, it was like I allowed myself to consider that as a possibility for the first time. And it was like literally like coming out of a hypnosis. It was,
Oh, wow.
It was so strange. It was so strange. It was like finally getting the punchline to a joke that I hadn't gotten for over 30 years or something. It was like, wow. It was like this huge realization that there's no way this is the only way any of this makes sense is if it's all fake. You know? If it's fictional, like Chronicles of Narnia or some fake shit, you know, like that's the only way any of it.
The only way to
make
make sense of this.
You know?
Yeah.
And then it was like devastating. Then it was like heartbreaking because suddenly all these characters in the scriptures and the Book of Mormon, everybody they were all my heroes. These were all characters that did these amazing things that were like examples to me since I was a child, you know? And now all of a sudden I was like, wait, they're not even real. They're literally just imaginary people that like Joseph Smith made up, like a comic book. Like
right?
and that was like devastating. Like all of my role models and heroes since I was a kid, like I realized were totally fictional. You know what I mean? So I mean, all of that like was a big unraveling. And then you go through all those levels of like, well, what is real then? You know what I mean?
Yeah, this starts a whole questioning. That's insane. Yeah, it unravels. I had a similar experience, like when I sort of started speaking out more online in like 2020, and then a lot of like, because I was raised Catholic, right? So a lot of like Christians would come at me with like, oh, well, why did the Catholics this and why did that? And it was like, for the first time, I was like, whoa, like I never received this sort of like how the preachers would come at you and be like, get out of here. I'd be like, ah, like it just, I never had that experience in like real life to that extent before. So it was pretty wild. And yeah, it makes you start to look at everything differently, right? Yeah.
They get very defensive. And like, that's the thing that makes it so difficult is that, and I remember being this way as a member when I was like an ingrained believer in the church and everything, is that like when I try to bring up things about the founder of the church, Joseph Smith, and be like, have you ever thought about like why he married a 14-year-old girl? And like, what is the whole deal with child brides anyways? Like, and all that. If you bring it up, even if it's just like a fair question or a logical thought to consider, they immediately jump to a response like you're offending Jesus. Like you're literally hurting the Lord because that's his prophet. And this is you're not supposed to question it. You know, it's like touching, it's like going into something that you're not even supposed to mention, you know?
Yeah.
And so you're offending them and you're offending the Spirit and you're offending God just by bringing it up. And that's so built into you as a member of the church that even internally, like when you're sitting there alone by yourself and you start to have questions or a doubt pops in your mind, you even have protocol trained into you where you literally push that negative thought or that doubt away. There's these mantras like doubt your doubts that you're taught to repeat to yourself. Doubt your doubts, you know.
Doubt your doubts.
That's literally one of the things that the prophet taught. Doubt your doubts, you know.
I was like, gaslighting.
And then you would say prayers and reconnect with the Spirit again and immediately go back to reading the scripture. So it's basically like antivirus software kicks in within you and pushes you back into the church. And then you feel bad that you even doubted, like you're guilty or like you're a sinner for, so you even keep yourself within the in the boundaries, all the time. And then as a father, you do that within your household, and as a couple. And so you're like taking your kids to church, teaching them to pray, getting them ready, and your whole family and everybody's watching you. But yeah, when all that comes unraveling on you, that's the big challenge, is because like as soon as you realize it's not true, like the Book of Mormon isn't real, Joseph Smith is a con man, all this stuff comes unraveling, then you're in the middle of this giant labyrinth that you've been running around your whole life like a rat in a maze, and you realize I cannot get out of this without literally every friend that I have all the way back since my childhood, all the way through high school, my entire family, my wife, my kids, my in-laws, everybody. And you're literally looking at your entire life, that if you leave the church, they're all going to know, they're all going to look at you like, great, now when doomsday happens, when Jesus comes back and we're supposed to go in the wilderness to survive, you're not going to be there, and then in the spirit world, when we die in the afterlife, like I'm not going to be in heaven with them anymore, and neither are my kids. And so they're like all devastated, so there's a huge amount of pressure around that. Like when we actually decided we were going to leave the church, I even had a sister-in-law call me on the phone, and she was weeping and crying, and she was saying how, like, when we're supposed to go into the wilderness to survive, where are you going to be? You're not going to be there. Where's your kids going to be? And she was like crying to me on the phone. And that was all because they were reading those books that Chad Daybell wrote, that guy that murdered his kids in the backyard. They were all those doomsday books, like her and my brother and everybody, they were all reading those books when they were saying that. And that's part of why I got out of the church too, is like, this is too wild. Like, this is crazy, but there's all that family pressure, and we had to move. Like, we were living in Idaho in a town called Pocatello, and I was in a leadership position at the church at the time, in the high priest group leadership. And then it literally occurred to me that the church wasn't true. And I talked to my wife about it, and she kind of realized it too. We talked about it for like 3 months, and we realized, like, we have to move. We have to move out of the state and then leave the church. Because if we leave the church now, like, every day somebody's going to come over and drive us crazy. Like, we're never going to get away from it. So
you'd be on the receiving end of the Mormon missionaries. You're like, no.
Yeah. And even when we did move and we got out of the church after we moved down to southern Utah, even the local church members, like within 2 weeks, they sent like 8 different groups to our house. There was like a group of kids came over, the young women came over, home teachers came over, the elders quorum came over. There was multiple different groups from the church and couples and things like that came over and tried to talk to my wife and my kids when I wasn't home and everything, to try and get us to go back.
Wow.
Yeah. We had to use lawyers, an organization out of Salt Lake City called quitlds.org. And they actually filed paperwork with the church that made it stop, where it said if anybody from the church comes and tries to talk to me or my family or my kids, that it would be considered religious harassment, because they literally wouldn't leave us alone.
Wow.
Holy crap.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
See, I grew up Jehovah's Witness.
Yeah.
And it's kind of the opposite would happen. I feel like they would, if you decided to leave or back out, it's kind of a similar thing, but instead of them hounding you and the entire family and people showing up, every single person you've known your entire life just completely cuts contact from you, and they don't talk to you at all.
Just shunned.
Like Scientology does that, I think, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's like the same thing.
That's wild.
Yeah, there's a mix of that. So the family kind of all does that. So it's really tricky. So like all of my nephews, most of my family, a lot of my cousins, siblings, my sister-in-laws and stuff, basically they all just unfollowed me and blocked me online because they're afraid that I'm going to post something about the church, that I'm going to post a video, or the fact that I'm doing an interview right now with you guys. This is going to get clipped or could get made into an Instagram reel, and I might share it, and then they're going to hear it. So now my brother, his wife, and his kids that go all the way down to like 13 years old are going to see Uncle Carl talking bad about the temple and about the Mormon church and about, and they all still believe it, you know? So it's safer and easier for them to just do that, to cut me off, to shun me, to not follow me online. And they'll invite me to things and stuff, but I can tell, like, when I show up to family events, it's like they'll have to edit themselves around me, like their normal way of talking, how they would gather to pray around dinner and everything. Everybody's glancing at me like, am I going to say something or cause a scene? You know, like there's just like a weird aura because I've left the church now. So I'm not one of them, you know, I'm on the outs. But now all these things have happened where like they swore that the end times were going to happen. They swore Jesus was going to come back, that New Jerusalem was going to be built, the prophecies, the blood moons, all this stuff written in the books. And now not only has none of that come true, but Chad Daybell and his wife are in prison, and like all these other things have happened, and the internet just keeps chugging along, showing, like, you can get on Chat GPT and you can say, is there evidence of plagiarism in the Book of Mormon? And Chat GPT within like 5 seconds will say, yes, there is, in this chapter, in this chapter, in this chapter, da, 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 and it will literally explain to you where there's like flat out evidence of plagiarism and scamming in the Mormon scriptures and stuff. And so there's no excuse except for putting the blinders on. Like, just like, I'm just going to believe and just continue to have my faith, you know.
I want to believe.
But like, yeah, you have to want to believe, you know. And in the end, that's going to create like a really, really passionate Orthodox core that's going to cling on to it like a barnacle to the end, you know. And they'll always be there. That's just like why they're still polygamous in Utah and stuff, that are still practicing polygamy, knowing that it's illegal. They'll just cling on to those beliefs like it has to be true, like they're hanging on to a rope, you know.
It's so interesting that it never occurred to you till you like stepped outside of your bubble, right? You know, like when you started doing the missionary work and whatnot, and like that's the first time you really encountered like any opposition. And then like, but when you were in your group and doing the rituals and whatever, you had that sense of like something is amiss, but you shoved it down, right? And I think it just like that reminded me of like the whole, you know, 2020 experience that we all had. It's like a lot of us knew something was amiss, but then like just stayed quiet because it's like you're looking at everyone around you and everyone around you is doing it. So you're like, well, I guess it's okay then, right? Or I don't want to be the one to like poke my head out. Like it takes a lot of courage to do what you did and basically blow up your whole life because you realized the truth and you had to stand in your truth, right?
It really can be devastating and very, very terrifying. And you have to be someone like I was always one of those kids that was like, I wanted justice, you know, like if somebody stole something from me, like in school as a kid, I wanted to track it down and make it right, you know. And if somebody lied to me, I wanted to go confront them. And I was kind of like one of those types of kids and stuff. And so, you know, it goes two ways. Yeah. Like I think traveling and getting out and opening up yourself to the world, you are exposed to things that suddenly you realize the punchline to the joke, or you hear this thing about church history that you can't unhear. And then it will just sit and eat at you. It's just like a thorn, you know. They call it like breaking your shelf. It's like you learn a thing and it's like you pick up that book that you just learned that thing and you put it on the shelf. How many things can you hear about the church that you realize are bad? until your shelf actually caves in and breaks and you realize that it's not good. But the problem is that your whole life until that moment happens, you're taught and programmed, and the cycle is that you're the problem. You're the one that's the odd one out. You're the common denominator. Like, look at everyone else in your family is doing fine. All your friends, the whole community has no problem with any of this. And now here I am. I haven't gone to church in 3 months, and everyone knows. They know I'm not there. You know, they literally take roll every Sunday, and they know I'm not there. They're going to start sending my friends over to invite me back, you know, and so you just always have this built-in pressure that, like, as soon as you start feeling like, I don't like this, like, for example, growing up, one of the things was the church started being really big on when you're a deacon, you're basically like 12 years old. And that's when you start passing the communion or the sacrament. So the bread and the water gets blessed, and Catholic church is bread and wine, right? And we do bread and water in Mormon church because they don't drink alcohol. So it's like bread and water. It's literally just like a loaf of bread, Wonder Bread from the store that they bless.
Wow, really?
Yeah, but they do like a whole prayer that they recite, and they read it off of a card. And then the deacons get up and pass the sacrament around. So you'd carry the trays of the bread and then the water around and you're like a little kid. And they started instituting this thing, like, you can't pass the sacrament as a deacon unless you have a white shirt on. And so it was like a whole thing, because my family was like poor. I literally went to church for several Sundays, and all I had was like a denim shirt, exactly like I'm wearing now, that I wore to church. And because of that, literally because of the color of my shirt, I couldn't pass the sacrament. So I was like unworthy and couldn't participate in the ordinance and pass the sacrament, even if I wanted to, literally because of the color of my shirt. And that was like the first thing as a kid where I started thinking, like, when my mom finally got me a white shirt so that I could do it, I thought to myself, if I had a closet that was full of shirts, and at one end was perfectly white and at the other end was like a black shirt, and every Sunday I just went one shade grayer all the way, like, at what point would they say that I wasn't worthy anymore? Like, what shade of color do I have to be to where I can't participate? And I had all those kinds of experiences where I realized I didn't fit in, or like the church wasn't working for me. But I always felt like I was the problem. Like, I was the stubborn one. Why can't everybody else is fine just putting on a white shirt? Why do I have to be this little pill, you know, that like is stubborn and causes a problem and goes to church on purpose with a denim shirt on, like as a protest? You know, I was like that kid. Like, I would go, like, and they would say, who wants to pass the sacrament? And I would raise my hand, knowing I'm wearing the wrong color shirt, and to make them tell me I couldn't do it, you know, like, and I was kind of like that as a kid. So it makes sense that ultimately I would get out of the church and other people wouldn't, because I was kind of always a little bit stubborn that way. But even for me, it was super hard, and it did cost me everything. When we finally left the church and got out of it, you look back through your life and you realize, like, the whole reason, like, we felt like we were supposed to get married because we prayed about it in the temple, you know. So if that's not real, what do we even know? What even is real anymore? And so like, it can cost you your marriage, it can cost you your family. You can go through a lot, you know. And then you're also left, like, if you've had strange experiences in your life, or spiritual experiences or paranormal encounters, you're left wondering, well, what about all that, you know? Because you used to explain it all through the church and through the scriptures about what's going on now. And so that's kind of why I'm doing what I do now, looking into UFOs and paranormal stuff like that. Because even though I'm not a member of the church, I still look back at my life growing up as a kid in the church and even on my mission and stuff, and I have to wonder about a lot of the things that happened that I thought were miracles, or that I thought was literally like a psychic experience where I was given an answer to a prayer, and so was someone else, and we both got the same answer. And so I'm like still super curious about like, well, what happened there? Because something actually did happen. But if it had nothing to do with being a Mormon, then what was it? You know, and can I still do it? You know, even though I'm not a member, can it still work? You know?
Yeah.
So all that stuff is really interesting to go through.
Those are good questions.
I totally have had the same experience, kind of like where at one point, you know, I'm not a Jehovah's Witness, but those beliefs are still pretty ingrained in my head, where I'm using just their prayers, just their Bible. But I've had what seemed like prayers answered in that way.
Yeah, like when I was a missionary, for example, you're swimming in religion and in the church and Mormonism and the scriptures all day. Like from the second that you wake up, you literally roll out of your bed and you get on your knees and say your morning prayer, and then you go in with your mission companion, the other guy that you're living with. You pray together, then you study the scriptures together. You study alone, and then you practice your missionary. Just like your whole day is literally just swimming in the church. And so we used to, like, you know, we would get put two of us in this apartment in this small town, and there'd be this like area that we're supposed to cover, that we're responsible for, and it's literally our job just to go out and talk to people, find people who are members of the church and have left, and then just go knock doors and try to recruit people and do service projects. And then like every Friday night they call and you have to tell them how many people you talked to, how many copies of the Book of Mormon you gave out, all that stuff. So it's like you're just swimming in it all the time. And we would get in this community and you would be like, nothing's going on. Like we're literally walking around like Walmart or the Kroger, and we're trying to talk to strangers at the fishing section about things, and nobody is talking to us. Like knocking on doors, and they just open the door and slam the door in our face. Like we're going to have to, on Fridays coming, they're going to call us and we're going to have zeros. Like we haven't given out anything, you know? So you get desperate. So you have one of two choices. You either, as a missionary, you either lie when that phone rings and you say, oh yeah, we gave out 3 copies of the Book of Mormon and we talked to 10 people. And you make up numbers even though you talk to nobody. Or you get desperate with your faith and you start praying for miracles like hardcore, and you put it to the test, like, God, you need to send us people. Like, and so that's what we did this one time in Jacksonville. And it's funny looking back on it now, because it was 100% like a remote viewing that we did. It was a straight up Stanford Research Institute remote viewing protocol that we did. But we were just literally like trying to figure out who in this town needs us as missionaries to come and talk to them today. And what we did was we got a map of the town out, and we laid it on the kitchen table in the apartment. And then what we did was I went in the bedroom and I closed the door, so I was by myself, and then I left my mission companion out there with the map. And what we did was I prayed for him to receive inspiration from God as to where we were supposed to go, exactly on the map. Where are we supposed to go today? And then when he felt like he got an answer, he was supposed to write it down and then fold it up and hide it in his pocket. And then when he was done, he would come knock on the door, and then we would trade, and he would pray for me while I looked at the map. So that's what we did. And so I went in and prayed for him, and pretty soon he came and knocked on the door. We traded, and then I looked at the map, and I sat there while he was in there praying for me, and immediately in my mind, it was like the name Cherry Street came to me, like Cherry Street, immediately. It was like I saw it immediately. So I was like, okay. So I wrote it down on my piece of paper, and then it was like nothing. Like I got no other names. I just sat there. It was like nothing felt right. So I felt weird. I just sat there for a minute, looked at a couple of others. So I wrote like 2 more down on the piece of paper, and I thought, well, that didn't work, you know? So I went and knocked on the door, got my mission companion. He came out, and I said, well, I don't know if this worked or not. So we pulled out our pieces of paper, and he says, well, I don't think it worked because I only wrote down one. And he unfolds this piece of paper, and it says Cherry Street. Like, out of the whole city, out of all of Jacksonville, Arkansas, we both at the top of the list, both wrote down Cherry Street. So we were like, hey, that's the answer. God told us, you know? So we like finished getting ready and everything. We like got on our bikes and we rode across town, and we went to Cherry Street. We like hooked up our bikes. And this is where it got weird, because like when we got to Cherry Street, normally what we would do was knock on every single door. So we'd knock on every door down one side of the street and then cross the street and knock on all the doors all the way back. And then we're back where we parked our bikes. And so, but this time we parked our bikes, and for some reason we just like walked past like the first 3 or 4 houses and didn't even go up to them. We're just like walking like, that's not it. That's not it. And we weren't really questioning it. And then all of a sudden there's a truck in this driveway that has Idaho license plates on it, which is like where I'm from. I'm like, no way, from Idaho. I'm like, and I literally just said, hey, this is it. So we went up to the door and knocked, and this lady, she opens the door and immediately sees us and just starts bawling. She just starts crying. And she goes, how did you know? How did you know? And we were like, what's going on? And she just starts crying. And we're like, well, hey, I'm a missionary from Idaho, and we saw your truck out here with Idaho plates, and we were just like praying to God who needed our help today, and we were supposed to come and talk to you. And so she lets us in, tells us, she goes, oh yeah, my husband was a Mormon, never went to church or anything, but just like a week ago, he drowned in a boating accident, and she was there by herself trying to pack up all of her stuff to try and move out of her house and had no help. And she said that it was like she prayed for someone to come help her. And right when she prayed, we knocked on the door.
Yo, that is
right when she prayed, we knocked. I don't know how. So to me as a missionary, I'm like, church is true. Like, this is real. That was a real miracle. You know what I mean? But I mean, since then, even not as a member of the church, out of the church, being an ex-Mormon, I've had just as many like amazing telepathic and spiritual experiences like that since, where I've known I was supposed to go help somebody and I've called them or gone and helped them. Same kind of thing. But as a missionary, when I was like 19, 20 years old, that was like, holy shit, this is real. This is real. Like, we knew right where to go. First door we knocked on, she was literally praying for someone to come help her. And it was even crazier because where she was moving to, she packed up all of her stuff to go back and move back with her family. And where she was moving to was back to North Carolina, which was where my brother was on his mission. So I was actually able to get permission to call my brother. So I helped her pack her stuff up and helped her move. And then she ended up getting help unpacking and moving into her house with my brother up in North Carolina. Like, the odds of it were just crazy to me. Like, how that all happened. But we definitely, like, we connected to something, like to her, to me, the map, the intentions to try and help someone that needed help that day. There was really something magical to that. I don't think it had anything necessarily to do with being a missionary or a member of the church, but it definitely put us in our consciousness in that right formula to where it happened, you know, where that really took place.
Yeah.
That was one of those cool ones.
Very cool. That's bugged out.
Yeah, that's a wild story.
Yeah, a lot of people, you know, you have experiences like that as a member of the church, and you never leave. You know, you would never ever question your belief in the church, like, and you hang on to those experiences. Like, you come back from your mission and you hear different things about the church, but then you hang on to that. Like, I can't explain those things that happened to me and stuff, and those are kind of what keep you in. But the whole trick is, like I said, even after you get out of the church and you leave it, you realize you can do the same thing. Like, I'll I'm not religious and don't go to church at all, but like on Sunday or whatever, just like you would go to church, I might sit here and do a meditation at home where I just go clear and I meditate and I'm very present and connect with the universe. And then I might feel like I want to go hike and look for petroglyphs and have a whole spiritual experience exactly the same way, just like when I was a member of the church. And you kind of realize really quick that belonging to the organization had nothing to do with those spiritual experiences. It just happened to be the case that you were a member of the organization when it happened, But if you're a good person and you're still trying to do that stuff, like if I sat here right now and really focused my consciousness, like who in my neighborhood needs help right now, and I went outside and started walking around, following my intuition, I guarantee you I'd find somebody, you'd run into somebody that was looking for help. I think the churches just kind of like, they know that. And so good people get the confirmation they're looking for in those moments.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's such a good point that you raised, Carl, because it's like, is it the church, is it the religion, the organization, or is it just like spiritually inclined people? Yeah. Because I can think of lots of people I know that go to church that are not spiritually inclined whatsoever.
Yeah.
So,
exactly. Yeah. Well, they tell you that it's like your access to the church. In Mormonism, it's clearly, they teach you that it's your ability to work in the priesthood. So as a man, like when you're first a deacon at 12 years old and you start to pass the bread and the water, they give you what they call the Aaronic priesthood, like the initial basic beginner priesthood. And that's like your authority to participate in the ordinances of the church or the rituals and actually conduct them, or to say the prayers and to be an officiator in those rituals. So you start off in these lower level priesthood authorities. And then ultimately, as you go up through the priesthood, you're also the jobs that you get in the church. They call them callings, but like the jobs that they ask you to do get higher and higher up and more important, But basically, you're afraid that if you're not like reading the scriptures, if you're not faithful, if you're not going to church every Sunday and going to the meetings, doing what you're supposed to, that your connection to that priesthood authority separates, like you're falling away and you're pulling away, just like your contact and closeness to the power of God is slipping through your fingers. So it's like you literally are supposed to get up in the morning and you put the garments on, like the underwear that you get in the temple when you do your endowment. So every day and all night while you're sleeping, you're wearing the garments that have the symbols, the Masonic symbols, and you're saying your prayers. And even when you're at your job all day, in the back of your mind, that like you're a member of the church, that you have the priesthood, that you have the power of the Holy Ghost and all that. So like, if you go home at night and you watch some R-rated movie or whatever, and you fall into sin, or you do something wrong, or drink alcohol, or even drink coffee or whatever, or even think a bad thought in your head, then basically it's like you're sinning and you become dirty and you lose that connection to God and you lose your priesthood. So the church teaches you that the only way to keep that is by going back. Like you got to go back and take the sacrament. You got to go back and confess your sins with the bishop, and you got to keep attending and going to the meetings, and you got to stay on the hamster wheel. Otherwise, you're just going to fall away and become filthy and become part of the world, And so that's what my family thinks I did. Like I left the church. Now I got tattoos. I do meditation. I'm interested in aliens. So like I'm like this heathen that's fallen away from the church and what they call an apostate. I have apostatized.
This rhetoric sounds familiar.
You worldly apostate, you.
Yes. I'm an ex-Mormon, anti-Mormon apostate. Yes. Yeah. And the fact that I go on podcasts and I talk about it and I tell my story makes me an actual anti-Mormon. So they would say I am a part of the Antichrist movement. So I'm literally like, they would say
Anti-Mormon
that I'm
propaganda.
like an enemy to the Lord. Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
But I get around my family and they'll all hug me and they smile and we're family and they hope that like someday God works it all out and we'll all be together in heaven or whatever. But yeah, I'm like a fallen away guy. And the fact that I'm like divorced or if anything goes wrong in my life, everybody that knows me looks at that like confirmation, like, see, because
you left the church.
Because he left the church. Yeah. Now look at these bad things happening to him. Look at him struggle now. Yeah. He just lost his family, and so they all look at that like, see, don't leave the church or you're going to end up divorced too. And so they just they just talk about you like that. It's pretty wild.
Yes, that is very wild.
Yeah. Oh, look how bad their life is going since they left the church.
Yeah, but it's so funny. Like when I realized that the church wasn't true, I was sitting at my computer desk at my house in Pocatello, Idaho, and I was 400 pounds. I had bad vision. I was like all pre-diabetic, super unhealthy, super depressed. And like when that came unraveling, it felt like my whole life was falling apart. But fast forward and I've lost like 175 pounds now. Like you could say I got divorced, but I actually got out of a bad marriage. Like I got out of a bad religion and out of a cult that I didn't belong in. And like since then I'm more in touch with myself and my genuine, authentic, just my own thoughts in my head and knowing who I am when I think my own thoughts and my own emotions, and being clear about that to me is so valuable now. And I, as a member of the church, I never had that. I never had peace of mind or peace of emotion, any kind of peace at all in my life. It was always like, got to do more. I got to go back to church. I got to read my scriptures. I didn't say my prayers this morning. It's like all these things that you feel like you got to live up to, and when all that goes away, you feel like it's going to be devastating. In some ways it is, but it's also like finally coming up for air and like finally being able to understand your own mind and your own emotions and your own spirituality without all of that shoved in there. And it's crazy because there's songs that will come on the radio, or I'll see just something on the shelf at the grocery store or whatever, and it will trigger a memory of like a song of when I was in primary school, when I was like 9 years old, and I was like a sunbeam at church, and they were teaching me these songs, Jesus wants me for a sunbeam to shine for me. And like all these songs like are baked into my head. I'm like 46 years old and I'll catch myself still.
It's in the back of your head, right?
Yeah. In the back of my head, I'll have these phrases that come up that were totally from the church or out of the Book of Mormon. I'm like, get out of there, dude. Like, who even am I without all that stuff in there? It's weird.
Yeah. It just shows the depth of the conditioning, right? It's a whole process. Like you're so much more tapped into like your authenticity, and that's probably what allowed you to like let go of a lot of things and lose weight, take better care of yourself, like get more aligned in your relationships, like all that, right?
There's tons of stuff like that, like just everything in your environment, like even like when you go out on a cold morning and you try to start the truck up and it's struggling, you're conditioned like as a Mormon to like start going, come on, you can do it. Like you're almost talking to your car, like it can hear you, like you're talking, like your truck is a living thing, but you're also subconsciously like praying, come on, you could do it. And you're like, and I wonder sometimes, I'm like, how much of that is because I was taught so much to pray, or is that like a normal thing that normal people do? If your car is not starting, do you talk to it too? Like there's so many weird things about yourself that suddenly you wonder, is that like a normal thing? Or does that come from like growing up in a cult where I like literally talk to myself in my own head all day? Like I have like it's like a form of counterfeit schizophrenia almost, where you're raised a member of the Mormon church, and it's like you have the Holy Ghost that's listening to you. You have the light of Christ. You've got Heavenly Father. There's all your dead relatives. There's all the spirits of Satan and the evil demons that are trying to tempt you and everything. These are all like voices and thoughts and emotions that are going on inside of you, and you're supposed to sort all that out and just listen to the gospel, or just listen to the truth and listen to the prophet. He's the only one that can keep you safe, you know, like going to church and listening to the leaders and following them. They actually say, stay in the boat. Like, don't get out of the boat. You'll drown in the ocean. Like, just stay a member of the church, stay in the boat, don't get out. And they say like that, you know, and really what that is like, stay gullible, keep your head buried in the sand, stay in the cave. Don't go look outside and realize there's a whole world out there. Just stay in the boat, you know. And it's such inbred thinking that it's really hard to get out of. It's really, really hard to get out of.
You never learn to trust your own voice. That's like abuse, you know?
Yeah. They really hijack from the time you're 8 years old, when they do a baptism and then they do the gift of the Holy Ghost ordinance. They basically ingrain into you that there's a spirit that's inside of you and following you around all day and watching and listening to everything that you do, that is a part of God and like part of the Godhead. And when you're 8 years old, they do a ritual where they give you that gift of the Holy Ghost and that spirit. So you're suddenly, instead of just being a kid going around just having your own thoughts to yourself, now all of a sudden it's like there's God's watching, you know, and the Holy Ghost is there, and he's like a spirit that sees everything that you're doing, everything that you're thinking. So as soon as you have like a bad thought, where you're like, that asshole or something like that, in your back of your mind, you're like, ooh, and it's like the little angel on your shoulder going, you know, and that's built into you to immediately self-correct like that, you know, and you're taught that's God speaking to you, self-correcting. But the problem with it is it's so unreliable, because it's so subjective to the individual, that you can get off on these paths. And that's like that guy Chad Daybell that murdered the kids in the backyard or whatever. He thought up to the moment when he did that and was burning those kids in the bonfire that he was listening to that spirit. You know, he's sitting in prison right now up in Idaho, telling himself, get down on his knees, probably saying his prayers to go to bed tonight, right now in prison. And he believes that he was listening to the same spirit that other people have listened to and had to make those hard decisions. Just like Abraham being asked to sacrifice Isaac in the Bible. They call it like the Abrahamic test, you know, like, do you really have the faith to do that if God asks you to? And I guarantee you, he's sitting in prison right now holding on to that and believes that he's still listening to the Holy Ghost, you know? So, I mean, it's just completely unreliable. That's the problem. It's just you questioning yourself and giving yourself a bunch of internal split personality, basically, you know, and you think that you're talking to God, and really you're just chasing your own internal thoughts around like a dog chasing his tail.
That's well said.
Yeah. Dog chasing his tail.
And I guess that's why so many Mormon women are on like all these different anti-anxiety meds and whatnot. I don't know. That's what Heidi said.
Yeah.
Heidi Love. She told me about that a couple of times. So
well, everything is off limits. You know, when you live in that culture where you don't even pick your own underwear, you get up in the morning and you don't even choose the underwear that you put on. The church decides all of that for you. You can't drink coffee. You know, like real hot drinks, really, no beer, no weed. You can't even think thoughts in your head. There's so many things like that. So there's only a couple of things that you feel like you don't have to feel guilty about. And that's if the doctor prescribes it. Like if they prescribe you hydrocodone and you get hooked on opiates that way, then you can be like, the doctor said it's okay. And the church doesn't say anything about that. And the other one is just food. Like, so a lot of Mormons are super overweight and out of shape because they get addicted to food, because you can't drink, you can't smoke, you can't even, you're sitting there as a grown man and you're watching Disney movies, you know, you can't even watch rated R movies. And pretty soon that's like a pressure cooker, you know what I mean? Yeah. And so if the one thing that you can do is eat pizza, that's how you wind up 400 pounds like I was. You just like, you just can indulge in the one thing you don't feel guilty about, you know?
Yeah.
So it can be a bad formula for sure.
Absolutely. Begging for rebellion. That's what I think. What's with the no hot drinks? Where's that? Do you know where that comes from?
You know,
it's such an arbitrary rule. Like,
yeah, Joseph Smith back in the day when he was the prophet, basically, as soon as that was established and he had a following that believed that he was the prophet and that he was talking to God, then suddenly everybody was coming to him like, well, what about this? Is this right? Or is this wrong? What about that? You know? And so it was really how they built the church to begin with was through plagiarizing and through borrowing bits and pieces and building it together like a puzzle. And so one of the more popular things at Joseph Smith's time was the temperance movement. And they had a belief that if you drank hot drinks that were like hot coffee and tea, that it would actually like boil the inside of your stomach and kill the healthy parts of your gut and things, and that you should only drink liquids at room temperature and things. And it's just a myth, you know, it's been proven that it's not even true. But it was part of the temperance movement. So when everybody started coming to Joseph Smith and they were like, well, what about tobacco? And what about alcohol? And what about this? What about that? They had to come back with an answer. And so they came up with what's called the Doctrine and Covenants. And it's considered scripture now, just like the Bible and the Book of Mormon. They consider in the church, they consider it part of the scriptures. And it's published, printed right as a part of the scriptures too, in the same binding. And it's basically, there's a whole chapter in there that's the Lord's law of health. And they call it the word of wisdom. And it's basically Joseph Smith just saying like, don't eat a lot of meat except for in times of famine or in times of winter, no coffee or tea, avoid hot drinks. And it just basically, no tobacco, made up a whole bunch of health rules and stuff, you know. And the church, members of the church don't even really follow it that well, except for like the way it kind of has rattled down through the generations is basically don't drink coffee or tea, don't drink alcohol, don't smoke or use tobacco products. And then anything that's like an addictive chemical, they consider against the word of wisdom, you know? And when you go to talk to your bishop to try and get permission to go to the temple, they ask you if you live according to the word of wisdom, like if you follow the Lord's law of health. And if you're drinking coffee, like if you went to Starbucks that morning, then you can't go to the temple. They'll say no. They won't give you the recommend. So you have to be following the law of health. But it's all super arbitrary because like I've sat in church where they've talked for a whole hour about the word of wisdom and the law of health and all that stuff. And right in there, it says not to eat very much meat, like to just eat meat sparingly, almost like a vegetarian, you know? And then as soon as the meeting was over, they get done talking about it for a whole hour. And then the high priest group leader gets up and he's like, hey, this Tuesday night, we're having a big steak fry. We're going to be cooking a bunch of steaks in the fryer and everybody come over to my house. So it's, you know what I mean? They talk about it and get up there and everybody acts like they're following it. And then they announce the steak fry immediately after. Jeez. So it's like some of that you're looking around, like if you really believe the church, like I did, I would look around. I'm like, nobody's even really following this. Like, what are we doing here? Like, those were some of those moments where I'm like, a steak fry? Like, we just got done talking about this, guys. Like, what are we doing here?
Like, how many people in that congregation actually caught that? You're like, am I the only one? Like,
that was one where, yeah, I went home from that meeting. I was like, what the hell's going on here? Like, are we really like, literally we talked about that for an hour, and then we got up like it didn't even matter and just announced the steak fry. Like nobody's even gonna try. It was like, it was hilarious. Like that stuff happens all the time. Yeah, that's funny.
Man, I wonder how many like dietary guidelines come from that actually. That just kind of like migrated from Mormonism into like modern dietary mythos, you know, like the little to no meat and like that's what they teach in school.
I don't know, but when when those different dietary trends come up or down or shift or whatever, whenever one kind of hits, they're like, see, Joseph Smith knew, like they like, right, like when one comes up, like this is the new healthy thing, then the Mormons are like, see, Joseph Smith was right, you know, 200 years ago he knew he was a prophet. You know, it's like, come on, like you could get anything and it'll come around.
I'm pretty sure that in Utah that most of like the supplement and vitamin industry comes from there as well, right?
Yeah, it was totally unregulated on that end too. Like I could start like a creatine company or like a protein powder, whey protein powder company here in my kitchen. And as long as I just copied the ingredients over from where I got the stuff, I could put my own label on it. And it's like in the state of Utah, it's almost completely unregulated. And then I could sell it on Amazon. Like and you would have no idea what's in it. Like there's tons of MLM things like that. And Mormons are big on like tons of people drinking energy drinks. Like around here, instead of Starbucks, they have what's called swigs, or like pops, and they're basically they're like drive-through soda shops. So like you could pull through and be like, oh, I want a Big Joe or something like that, and it's literally like a Diet Coke with coconut cream and lime, and they basically try to treat every soda and diet soda you can think of, like Dr. Pepper or whatever, like it's a bar, like it's a mixed drink bar. And so in the summertime, you go look at the swigs here in St. George, Utah, and there is a line clear down the road, like of cars trying to go through the drive-through, because you can't drink coffee. You can, like, instead of getting up and going to Starbucks or whatever to get a mocha, they all go get their swig.
That is fascinating. Yeah, I didn't know about the no caffeine and the no hot drinks for the longest of time. And then a friend of mine started selling this stuff, an MLM. It's called Amare Global or something. And it's from Utah. And it's it's a neurotropic. Yeah. So it basically gives you the sort of the effects of caffeine, but like makes you literally feel like you're on like MDMA. Like I tried it and I was like, yo, I don't even want this every day. Like what they call it, happy juice.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, no wonder it comes from Utah. Like now that makes so much sense. Right?
I know. And then you're like, have you looked at the ingredients? And they're like, shh.
Yeah. They're like,
we don't want to talk
caffeine,
about
It's not caffeine, so it's allowed, right? Like
but they don't want to. If it lands on the radar of the church, then the church leaders might come out and mention it, and then all of a sudden they're like, "Oh, we gotta quit drinking this now."
No, but I think it's Mormon run company. Like I was just like, that makes sense. Getting around the caffeine loophole.
And they do that all over the place. There's so many MLMs and companies and startups like that, like all over the place. There's a huge one called Melaleuca. That's like huge makeup and lotion and like health and beauty supply store or whatever. A massive company. But yeah, I remember I was like a little kid when that started, but a lot of those start in Idaho and Utah. And half of how Las Vegas and Nevada and a lot of the secret military installations were contracts through the government and the state of Nevada and Utah and the church. And a lot of people don't know that, but there was a lot of relationship back and forth. Like when the mafia was building Las Vegas, the Mormon church moved in with all of their money and basically like bought up and controlled over half of the city, and then got the government involved. And that's a lot of how like Area 51 and Dugway Airfield and NSA headquarters in Utah and a bunch of that stuff got done. part of why the church is one of the richest in the country now, if not the richest church in the country. But yeah, they make deals behind the curtain all the time.
Yeah, I had a guest on that, like, pretty much, like, it was showing stuff like that about, like, I think the government giving them money, pretty much, or the CIA, to, like, kind of get involved inside the church.
Yeah, the Mormon church has gotten caught before. Like I said, I went on a mission to Arkansas when I was 19. And before you go on a mission, you have to go to the Missionary Training Center. They call it the MTC. It's like a boot camp. It's basically like a college campus in Provo, Utah, right next to BYU. And you actually go live there in the dorms, and it's like you're training and living like a missionary full time, but it's all supervised. So before they send you out, like to the Philippines or Guatemala or something like that, or like I went to Arkansas, you have to go there. So like I only went for, I think I went for 6 weeks, but some missionaries, if you're learning a foreign language, you'll go for like 3 months and live there, because you're like every day and all day you're like speaking Spanish or whatever to learn the new language. And then at the end of the 3 months, they ship you out and they pair you up with somebody, and then you got to do it, you know. But when you go into the MTC, you're like in the uniform all day, and you're living with a bunch of people you don't know, and the that are just from all over the place, that are all going through the same thing. It's just like going into Army boot camp. And but the church has gotten caught a few times where they've made deals where they've had CIA agents go in with fake identities, like fake passports and fake IDs, pretending to be a 19-year-old missionary. And then they go through the MTC just like they're one of the kids. And then the church assigns them like to go to Uruguay or somewhere, or down to Cuba or something, you know. And then next thing you know, there's 2 CIA assets pretending to be Mormon missionaries that are in Cuba together. And then the mission president gets the order to put these 2 missionaries together to work together in the community. And then you've basically, the church has helped the CIA smuggle 2 spies to do espionage. So then you've got 2 CIA assets living together, pretending to be Mormon missionaries in a foreign country. And the church even paid to teach them the language, you know? And then
crap.
Yeah, and they can go around all day in the daytime and put their hours in and just play the role and do the missionary thing on the surface. But then they're actually going out as CIA assets and getting intel, doing their real job. But they've gotten caught. I mean, you can Google it and look it up. The church has gotten caught a couple of times with CIA assets embedded into the missionary training program, pretending like they were 19-year-old missionaries. Yeah, it's a whole thing. Yeah.
Yeah, no one suspects you. You're able to go door to door and ride on
Yeah, it's the
bike.
perfect cover.
Yeah.
Jeez.
Yeah, they just look like a couple of 19-year-old kids that are out there helping the old lady mow the lawn. You would have no idea that they're spying on the embassy, you know?
Good cover.
Yeah, that is genius. Wow.
Yeah, a lot of those deals get done, and it's easy to use Mormons and wealthy members of the church and the church itself to do like land grabs, to buy real estate and things like that. And then they'll lease it out through government contracts to put like big government installations and things on the land. And so there's a ton of that goes on too, because the church can go, like, imagine like up in Idaho or Utah, the church can see this farmer out here who's got all this acreage. He's got like 500 acres that his great grandpa had that he inherited or whatever. The church can go out there and pressure them and guilt trip them and be like, this is the work of the Lord, you know, and manipulate that guy to selling the land for almost nothing, or even donating it to the church like it's a test of his faith, you know. So the church will just take all that land and then they'll turn around and either build like a big shopping mall on it or a big condo on it or whatever. They don't even build like a temple or anything religious on it, or they'll establish the land and like build another NSA headquarters on it or something and lease it back to the government. So that's why they're busy doing and why they're so wealthy.
Jeez.
Yeah, it's like it's a really easy way to get away with it and to launder the money and to make it look like charities. You just do whatever you want.
Damn, yeah. That is wild.
Gotta do something with all that tithing money.
Yeah, see, and some people figure that out. Like as members of the church, you see how wealthy the church is and what they're doing, and you just tell yourself that you're glad you're on the winning team. Like glad it's our guys. Like we're right.
Oh my God, that's one way to look at it.
Yeah, well, it's better us. Who else do you think should have all this money? Of course, it should be the prophet.
Oh damn.
I would give him my house if he asked me as a test of my faith, That's the spirit, Those are the promises that you make though when you go through the temple and the endowment. One of the covenants and the promises that you make in the temple is that you will give all of your time, talents, and resources and everything that you have to the church if required. That's literally almost word for word what they ask you. And you have to raise your arm in the air and then bow your head and say yes out loud and make the oath. They're like, you'll give all your time, talents, and all that you have. It says even your life, if necessary, to the building up of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in the Lord's kingdom. And you put your arm in the air and you say yes. And you make the oath.
Damn.
So when you leave, it's like a big deal,
Yeah, like for sure. I mean,
True.
damn.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's a very big deal. Come on.
Yeah. Well, I guess that's why they build up years of like, kind of crushing your questioning spirit, to then bring you to that point.
Yeah, when you're finally in there making those oaths, when you're going through the temple, it's like everybody around you, even like your dad, your uncle, your brothers are in there. Like you're going through for the first time, the whole community, like, half of the people in the room are from your church, they're there for you to go through. It's like your birthday or whatever, it's like a whole big deal, like your baptism. So it's like a big thing everybody's been looking forward to you going through the temple. And then you get in there and they're like, what's your choices? Like, what's your option? You either go through with it and follow along and just mimic what everybody else is doing and get through the whole thing. You're like, you've already gone through all these curtains. You've already gone through all these different steps and you're in so deep. Now you're in this whole room and everybody's chanting and you're like, oh, yes, yes. And you're all praying. You're doing all this weird shit, but you're looking around and there's your dad, there's your grandpa, your brothers, everybody's going along with it. Like it's the right thing to do. Like it's just normal, like and they're like, isn't this cool? Wow, isn't this such a special experience? And you're like, I guess so, I guess it is. It's kind of weird, but you just like go along with it because you feel like I'm the weird one, like I'm the one who doesn't get it. I'm just confused because I've never done it before. So you just feel like you're the one who doesn't get what's going on. But yeah, so you just put your arm up and you just go through it. And inside yourself, you're just like, please help me figure this out. What the hell's going on? Yeah. But I remember going home after I went through the temple the first time and my mind was just blown. I remember I told one of my friends who hadn't gone through yet, and I was like, dude, you have no idea. And he's like, what are you talking about? I was like, I think I went through the temple and it's like, I know what the church is really all about now. And he's like, well, what is it all about? And I was like, I don't know. And I'm not supposed to tell you. It was like a whole bunch of handshakes, all that Masonic initiation stuff, like it was so different than normal Sunday church. I was like, wow. But to me, part of me was like, if this is real, then this is like how you learn real magic. Like this is really like, you're telling me like, like God or an angel can show up inside the temple, and like I might see one in there. And so you just get like obsessed with it. Like if it's true, you want to get really good at it, you know? So I tried to memorize it all. I tried to be really good at it. I went to the temple and did it all the time. I went back and over and over again. And then you get out of the church and you look back and you go, well, that was a waste of time.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
It would have been better to go like help real people, like in a homeless place or something, you know?
Yeah, it seems like it contradicts the teachings of Jesus quite a bit. You know, it seems, you know, he knocking over the exchanging money at the church and all that. And so how do they reconcile that?
They don't, you know, those were all some of the things that made me ultimately realize that the church was corrupt, and why I left it. Was one of the things they did was the church built the City Creek Mall. They spent like almost $40 million building a huge shopping mall right across the street from the Salt Lake Temple. And to me, there's like straight up, like you said, a story right in the Bible where Jesus goes to the temple and he sees the priests, the Pharisees and the Sadducees and stuff, the priests of the temple, and they're like working at the steps of the temple and right across the street, and they've turned it into a marketplace. So he gets mad and literally chases them off with a whip, you know, for desecrating his house. And then the Mormon church spends like $40 million and builds a giant outdoor shopping mall right across the street. I'm like, instead of a homeless shelter or like something that actually helps people, they built like a giant multi-million-dollar shopping mall. I'm like, it's just obvious that if Jesus actually comes back, like they're counting on for doomsday, if he was going to toss the tables over back then in Jerusalem, what do you think he's going to do to the City Creek Mall? Like to that abomination? Like, what do you really think is going to happen? Like, and they, when you bring that stuff up, like when I try to bring it up with my brothers or anybody who's still a member of the church, they just say, well, the corporations of the church are different than the religious institutions of the church, and they just compartmentalize it all. And they also say, like when I talk about Chad Daybell murdering his kids in the backyard or whatever, they just say, well, the members of the church are individual people with problems. They don't represent the gospel or the church as a whole, you know. And they just have a way to rationalize anything that happens, you know. Like they'll look at the shopping mall, they look at all of that, and instead of their putting it on their shelf and their shelf breaking, they just bottle all that up like a pressure cooker, and they just stay faithful. You know, they just bury it and keep going. They don't even question it. They doubt their doubts. As soon as they start to think about that, as soon as they start to question it or start to feel like that's bad, that must be a temptation from the devil trying to get them to leave the church. And so you just shut it off, you know, go say your prayers and get back onto the rituals.
That's a line and a half. Doubt your doubts. Oh.
Doubt your doubts.
Pull that
big slogan. Yeah.
Pull that shit on my kids sometime.
When the prophet came out and said, that, like over the pulpit, that was like a whole thing. Like that was like a slogan forever for like 10 years. Everybody went around in the church saying that. Damn. Doubt your doubts. Yeah, and stay in the boat. That was another one.
I've heard that. Yeah, even in like Catholicism and stuff, you know, it's interesting.
Yeah. Similar too. I've heard a lot of similar things with Jehovah's Witness, that similar kind of thing of the shunning and it's really interesting. A lot of similar patterns. I think some of those organizations that were founded during that same era that came up and became different American religions all have sort of that weird basis.
Yeah, there's even like the Jehovah's Witnesses, like the original guys, they like built this house because there's about 7 dates they have for Armageddon, but I want to say it was the 1914 date they chose, and they built a whole house for the angels to basically stay in for for Armageddon, like angels would need material items and houses and stuff like humans and stuff.
That's the idea of what I can't get about like every Mormon temple and why they think there needs to be a temple in New Jerusalem. And they literally think that the temple in Salt Lake City. So I've been there. I've been inside the Salt Lake temple, the main one. I mean, they've got hundreds of temples all over the world now, but the big main one in Salt Lake City is very Masonic and very old school. It was built like by Brigham Young back in the old day, you know, like the original. And man, you go in there and it's like they have a room in the upper level. Like you go up these spiral staircases, you go through all the different stuff. And then once you finish the endowment and you go through the veil, you're in what they call the celestial room. And it's like this big ornate room with all these stained glass, and it's like vaulted ceilings and all this crazy stuff all ornately done. But off to the side, there's like this room that's like locked with these huge doors, and they've got these big like vases, like planters with plants in front of it. And there's like a person standing there all dressed in white. And they swear that that's the Holy of Holies, the exact same thing as what Moses had in the tabernacle, where they kept the Ark of the Covenant, where God or Jehovah would appear. You know, they would go through the different animal sacrifices out in the outer chamber of the tabernacle, and then go in and burn the incense, and then go into the veil, into the Holy of Holies, and then God would appear and tell the children of Israel what to do. And in the Salt Lake Temple, they believe that they have the real Holy of Holies and that it's there. Like I've gone up and like touched the doorknob and the door. There was one time where the doors were open and I looked in the room. It's like all the walls and there's these two mirrors on either side. So they, like when you look in the mirror, they reflect each other. Like the walls are both giant mirrors. And so like each mirror is like an infinity mirror. So when you look in one, it reflects all the way to the other for infinity in both directions. So it's like two giant infinity mirrors. And then the whole room is done with like all these rubies and gems and jewels and like all this crazy ornate stuff and all elaborate. But yeah, they swear that the Mormon prophet and the apostles or whatever go in there and they say their prayers or whatever. And then like Jesus appears to them and tells them what to do.
What? Oh my God.
That's why their members of the church are like okay with whatever they do. If they build a shopping mall or whatever, if they hoard $300 billion, they don't care because they think, you know, the Holy of Holies, like God's, is literally showing up in the Salt Lake Temple and running the church. Oh. They believe that it is being run by Jesus. Like the prophet is just his spokesperson. Like my brother flat out believes that Jesus appears and materializes in that room in the Holy of Holies in Salt Lake and tells Russell M. Nelson what to do at the church every time he goes in there.
Wow.
That's the belief.
That's true.
I'd argue there's something in there he's talking to.
Probably, right?
He's talking to something for sure. It's all the lawyers from Curtin McConkie. They just handed him a stack of child abuse lawsuits he's got to deal with. That's what he's thinking about in there.
Yeah, right. Oh, that's funny.
Yeah.
Oh
wow.
Yeah, who knows what he's talking about or who he's talking to. Where that all originated was from Joseph Smith doing that Enochian magic, putting a seer stone in a hat, putting his face in it, and then talking to God through a rock in a hat. So like they still have that rock and they still have the hat. So he probably goes in there and tries to do that for all we know.
Oh my God.
Who knows?
I got to tell Carl something that happened when we did that Eclipse episode.
Yeah.
I was reading up on Joseph Smith, looking into the hat. And then at work the next day, at one of my restaurants I deliver to, this lady walks out with one of those old hats in her hand and walks to her car, and it was an old one too, gets in the car and drives off.
Really? What the heck?
Yeah, out of a restaurant too.
Oh my god, what are the odds? Honestly,
Carrying an old top hat and just like
Yeah,
that.
just an old top hat in her hand, and she's like waiting across the street. And she didn't come out until as soon as I pulled into the
There's some gold plates in there.
where the restaurant is at.
Is that,
Yeah.
that Manitou?
That's hilarious.
Manitou witches?
Yes. I still
Might
to
as well
this
be.
just because of being brought up in the church, like we were joking earlier about how like when my car won't start or something, I'll like talk to it and still like catch myself like I'm praying or something, even though I don't have those beliefs anymore. It's like baked into me. I still, when I go places, like when I go up and visit like Skinwalker Ranch, or I'm someplace where there's supposed to be a UFO crash or whatever, I cannot help myself. I have to find a weird looking rock and like take it and I bring it back, and I feel like somehow deep and down like this rock knows and wants to come home with me. and I don't care. Like I know that some of that comes from the church and from Joseph Smith and the seer stone thing, because like you're always like, I wonder if there's a seer stone for me, you know. And so like I have my desk right now, I've got rocks from Skinwalker Ranch and all over the place and all over my house, because I can't help myself. It's like one of those things probably from the church and Joseph Smith and the seer stone, where now I'm a little like a rock collector. When I go somewhere special, I'm like, that rock's supposed to come home with me. That's a special
funny.
one.
Hey, I do the same thing, man. I don't even feel bad. I got them all up.
Carl, are you like going through my phone or something? I swear, every time we talk, you talk about the very things I'm looking into weeks before.
Fucking
Feels like that sometimes, right? For sure.
It does feel like that sometimes. Do you have any Amazonite?
Do I have any what?
Amazonite.
Amazon night? It's Amazon
Yeah,
night.
Amazonite. Yeah, like Amazon.
I don't know how to say
I
it
don't
either.
think I do.
No, all right.
It's a stone or a crystal, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Was
it's
it
like
supposed to have any
jade.
special powers or something?
Yeah. It's like supposedly like one of the
King Solomon wore it on his chest. We got tons of it out here in Colorado. The Utes used to pull it out of the ground and make medicine wheels with it. It's like
Oh,
a
wow.
bluish green stone.
Oh, okay.
Ooh.
yeah. It's kind of like turquoise, but it's different.
Nice.
I might
But yeah,
actually have it. I might actually have a piece of that out on my entertainment center by my TV. I didn't know what it was called, but that's probably it. It looks
Yeah,
like
it's-
turquoise, like blue with like this a weird almost. It looks almost like toothpaste, like a
Yeah,
lot
exactly.
of blue with
Yeah.
like a turquoise green going through it.
I know what you
pretty.
mean. Like how it looks
Yeah,
like toothpaste.
exactly.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Egyptians, the Phoenicians used it. King Solomon on his breastplate had one in it, and it was really important to the Utes. So it's a pretty special stone.
That's cool. Yeah, I'm into it. I wish I was better at geology, and I wish I knew what more of them were. Most of it's just like, that's a weird looking rock, and so I take it home with me. And then sometimes I
funny.
find out later what it is. But yeah, that's cool. I like stuff
Oh,
like
yeah.
that. But
All right. If you guys don't mind, just due to time and stuff, I'm gonna probably have to wrap this episode up. Carl, I will definitely, if you don't mind, I would love to get you back on in the future and actually talk about this little machine you got going on and everything else going on separately. Maybe we can get you on. Because if I pull that up now, we're going to be in here for another 20, 30 minutes. So.
yeah,
You know what I'm saying?
that's a
Yeah,
whole other
yeah.
good conversation.
Yeah. And I'm actually thinking, like, if I give you some time, you might actually just have more stuff to talk about anyway, along.
Yeah, it's all kind of tentative. We got big announcements coming with the modular study that we have going on with Dr. Jim Segala, but all of that's still tentative. But
Yeah.
hopefully being able to make a big announcement soon. But yeah, we'll save that for another one.
Definitely. Yeah, and if that definitely goes through, I'll have you on just to, talk about it, like you said. So thank you very much, Carl. I always appreciate your stories. I know this one is a little bit different, like the last episode. It was a little bit more personal about your other things, but this was a plethora of information, and just to hear the experience that somebody had, and thank you for, very much for being so candid and just open and honest. I appreciate
It's my
that.
pleasure.
Yes.
Thanks.
And Teresa, real quick, let everybody know where they can find your wonderful show at.
Yeah, so I have the Spiritual Gangsters, which is on, of course, YouTube, Rumble, all the audio platforms where you can find podcasts. And I'm also doing my tinfoil hats again. So if anyone wants a hat that says whatever you want on it, but a lot of people seem to like the tinfoil one. But yeah, I'm doing those right now, and those are all in my link tree and whatnot.
Yeah, definitely go check those out. Tinfoil hats or whatever else. You get a Riz, no cap.
Oh yeah, for the teens out there,
Yeah,
the Gen Z folk, the Riz and Skibbity and all that.
Yeah,
stuff,
words I don't even know what they mean. Oh, awesome! Yeah, her links will be in the bottom. And Carl, let everybody know again where they can find your work as well.
Yeah, just look up Carl Crusher on YouTube, Instagram, everywhere. Rumble. If you type in Carl Crusher, you'll be able to find me. It should pop right up.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And I will have your show notes in the bottom. And Thrash and Mike, thank you very much for coming on again as usual. I'm sure I will see you guys shortly as well. Yeah, and that is the end of another Occult Rejects. And until the next one, everybody be well. Later.